There were rose petals scattered across the chapel floor, but no feet to follow them. Just silence. Heavy, honey-thick silence that clung to the air like smoke. The sky above that little western town was a soft gold, the kind that made everything look hopeful from a distance. Dresses swayed on the porch railings. Children played beside church doors, not knowing why the music had stopped before it began. And she sat there, still in her wedding dress, bodice laced too tight, cheeks blushed by someone else's hands. She didn't cry. She didn't chase. She only sat, hands folded like folded wings, eyes locked on a pair of boots disappearing into the horizon. He'd left. The man she was meant to marry slipped out through the back door before the preacher could even clear his throat, took the horse, the ring, and the dignity she'd stitched so carefully into every seam of her gown. They whispered quickly. The women, the ones in lace gloves and plum shawls. How they always do. Said she'd lied about something. Said he saw her scars in the candlelight the night before. Said he was right to go. The preacher's wife brought her tea in a chipped mug. Said you poor dear in a voice that meant you foolish girl. Then walked away before the cup was even lifted. But the girl stayed, sitting on the chapel's back step where the altar flowers had begun to wilt. Somewhere behind her, a little boy with a colic stood watching. Too young to understand shame, old enough to recognize heartbreak when he saw it. She stayed until the shadows stretched too long for comfort. Then she stood, brushed the dust from her skirt, and started walking. No carriage waited. No father came. Just her, a bag she'd packed with trembled hope, and the sun at her back like a door closing quietly behind her. The prairie didn't care where she went. It only stretched, wide and empty and gold as memory. Her steps made no sound in the long grass. Only the cricket spoke. Miles out past the cottonwoods and the split rail fences lived a man who spoke even less than the prairie. They called him a widower. Some said a recluse. A few said he'd lost his heart in a fire that took more than just timber. He fixed his fence with hands rough as bark, shoulders tired from holding up more than just beams. He didn't look up when the wind carried birds overhead. He didn't glance back at the house, either. The windows still had lace curtains, but no one looked through them anymore. His barn leaned right, like an old man hunched with memory. Snow patches from last week still clung to its shadowed side. Nothing bloomed. But that day, something shifted. He heard footsteps. Not work boots or wagon wheels. Bare heels on packed dirt. Soft. Hesitant. He turned slowly. And there she was. A woman in a dirt-dusted wedding dress. Shoulders squared as if daring the wind to push her down. Eyes full of something he hadn't seen in a long while. Desperation dressed in dignity. She didn't ask right away. Just stood at the fence like she wasn't sure the world would let her speak. He waited. She said, softly, I'm not asking forever. Just tonight. He said nothing. He just opened the gate. She stepped through like she was entering a church, not a stranger's land. Inside, the house smelled of pine and dust. No photographs on the walls. Just an old map, a rifle hung above the door, and a rocking chair that never rocked anymore. He showed her the back room. Said you'll find a blanket in the chest. And then he disappeared like smoke into the hallway. She sat on the edge of the bed. The quilt beneath her smelled of cedar and thyme. She didn't undress. Didn't sleep. Outside, a storm whispered far off, like something unsure if it should come close. In the morning, she left a note on the kitchen table. It said, I have nowhere to go, but I won't stay where I'm not wanted. Thank you for the roof. That's more than most would give. She left it beside a crust of bread he'd left her during the night. But she didn't walk far. Her legs gave out at the fence line. Not from weakness, but from the weight of pretending. He found her there, sitting in frost-touched grass, staring at nothing. Didn't ask why she hadn't gone farther. Didn't tell her to rise. He sat beside her, silent as dawn. And she, for the first time since the chapel, exhaled. He offered her the reins without speaking. Let her decide what came next. She stayed. Not because he asked. Not because it was easy. But because no one had looked at her like that before. Not with pity. Not with hunger. Just recognition. like maybe he'd once been left, too. She cleaned the porch that day, picked up fallen shingles from the barn roof. She moved like someone desperate to be useful, to earn square footage with service. The townsfolk saw her shadow once or twice at the general store, but they didn't greet her. Not really. Just watched her with the side-eye curiosity they reserved for strangers and scandals. Someone pinned a note to the church door. A man who lets in ghosts should not be surprised when the house grows cold. She saw it, smiled bitterly, took it down and folded it like scripture. Never said a word. That evening, the widower found her on the porch steps, oiling a pair of broken shoes. Her wedding dress had been cut into rags. She used one to wipe the mud from the soles. He leaned on the post beside her, spoke low. "I ain't one to pry, but that letter you left." She looked up, eyes hollow but brave. "I was left at the altar. He found out something about me. Said it wasn't his burden to carry." The man didn't flinch, didn't ask what, just nodded. "You hungry?" She smiled. A real one, though small. "I'm tired more than hungry." He opened the door and gestured her inside. She stepped past him into the dim warmth. In that moment, something changed. The house still creaked. The wind still knocked. But the quiet, it softened. It no longer sounded like grief. It sounded like waiting. Like maybe the house had been holding its breath for her. As night wrapped the prairie in silver cold, she lay awake on the cot, staring at the ceiling. The wind whispered again. Not cruel, just curious. And in the kitchen, she heard the soft sound of a second plate being set. The man hadn't eaten alone in months. She rose, didn't change out of the cotton shift he'd lent her, just walked barefoot to the table. They sat across from one another, two people who had been left, forgotten, or deemed too much. He passed her the stew, without a word. She thanked him without saying so. Outside, the sky began to snow soft and slow. It landed on the roses still scattered by the chapel. And somewhere, a boy who remembered her sad eyes wondered if maybe this story wouldn't end like the others. Because sometimes a home doesn't begin with vows or bells. Sometimes it begins with silence shared between two people too tired to pretend anymore. And when the first snow settled on the barn roof that night, the prairie watched and whispered. They don't know it yet, but something has begun. The mornings were colder now, not just in air, but in feel. A stillness had settled over the house that wasn't quite sorrow anymore, but not yet peace either. It was a quietness that didn't ask to be explained. It just was. She rose early, before the rooster's silence, before the widower stirred from the back room. Her breath came out in white curls as she stepped barefoot into the kitchen. The stove was stubborn and the kindling damp, but she coaxed flame from it like prayer. She was learning that fire came from gentleness, not force. The same could be said for men. The man of the house, he hadn't asked her to stay. Not with words. But every day that he didn't tell her to leave felt like another thread added to the fabric of belonging. He moved through the house like a shadow without malice. Measured steps. Rough hands that fixed what broke but didn't touch what wasn't his. He left her space. She left him bread. She found a broom in the corner and made the floorboard shine. Not for thanks, but because clean spaces felt safer. She patched a curtain and folded laundry that wasn't hers. She hummed once softly. The sound startled even her. She stopped. This was a house that remembered the sound of another woman's laughter. That much was clear. Her perfume still lingered faintly in the wardrobe. A hairbrush rested undisturbed near a cracked mirror. The widower never touched it, but he hadn't moved it either. And when she opened the chest at the foot of her bed, she found a pair of baby shoes wrapped in yellowing muslin. She didn't ask. She only folded them back where they'd been and closed the lid gently, as if sealing up a memory that wasn't hers to carry. The days passed with quiet ritual. She kneaded bread with practiced hands, as if shaping dough could steady a life. He brought in chopped wood without a word, set it beside the hearth, and left. Sometimes he lingered in the doorway, watching, not her, the motion of her work, the steadiness of her presence. He began to leave things near her plate in the morning, a worn book, a strip of ribbon, a small tin of salve for the blisters on her hands. Gifts without announcement. And she received them the same way, with silence, but never without notice. Still, there were moments when the weight of the unspoken nearly cracked the air. Like the night the storm rolled in. A blue dust sky turned black in an hour. Wind shrieked through the trees like a warning too late to be heeded. He came and soaked, his coat dripping, and she had stew already waiting on the stove. They sat across from each other, candlelight between them, and ate in a silence filled with things neither of them knew how to ask. She cleared her throat. He looked up. "I used to talk too much," she said softly. "Thought if I explained enough, people might understand me. Might stay." He didn't blink. "Didn't work," she added. He tore a piece of bread, dipped it slowly into his bowl. "Some things don't need saying," he replied. And that was the first time she realized his quiet wasn't distance. It was choice. A man who'd spoken too much once, and paid for it. That night, she dreamed of a door. One she kept knocking on, over and over, but never opened. When she woke, the fire had gone out. But someone had tucked a second blanket over her. She didn't hear him do it, didn't see him leave. But she lay there, unmoving, eyes fixed on the ceiling, and whispered, "Thank you," to the dark. The next day, a peddler came down the lane, bells jingling on his mule's harness, though the animal looked none too merry. He had fabrics, pins, a cracked music box, and a sly tongue. She stepped out to see the goods. The peddler's eyes lit up with recognition. "Well, I'll be," he chuckled. "You're the girl from the chapel, the one left with cake and questions." She stiffened. The widower stepped out then, arms crossed, not speaking. The peddler raised both palms, playful. "Didn't mean offense. Just, folks are still talking. Said the fella left you high and dry. Said it had something to do with a condition." She looked away. "Shame," the peddler said. "You're better off, I'd wager. Fella like that ain't made for hard winters." She said nothing. But when he left, she burned the last piece of lace from her gown in the stove. Not out of anger, out of release. That night, she didn't light the lamp. Just sat on the floor, her back to the wall, arms wrapped around her knees. He found her there, stood for a long moment, then sat down beside her, not touching, just close enough to share breath. She finally spoke. "He left because I told him something. Something I carried with me a long time. I thought if he loved me, he'd stay anyway. He didn't ask what." She turned her head slightly, just enough to see his profile in the firelight. "Why did she leave?" she asked. He didn't answer at first. Then, she didn't. Her breath caught. He stared straight ahead. Fever took her. And the baby. Same week. She closed her eyes. So that was the shadow in the hall. The weight in the corners. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He nodded once. "Me too." Neither spoke for a long time. When he rose, he offered a hand. She took it. Not to be lifted, but to be grounded. The days after shifted slowly. She let herself hum again, softly. And this time didn't stop. He sharpened her sewing scissors without being asked. She mended his shirts and left them folded neatly on his bed. They didn't speak of past again, but began, instead, to speak of tomorrow. Little things. "We'll need to fix that back fence before snow sticks for good. There's a root cellar under the floor. Needs clearing. Would you mind showing me how you make that bread rise so high?" Their language became usefulness. A shared purpose. Gentle acts of presence. One morning, she found a ribbon tied around the broom handle. Not fancy, just green gingham. But when she touched it, her fingers trembled. He'd noticed she used a torn rag to tie her hair. That same afternoon, a woman rode up from town, dismounted like a queen. Gloves pearl-buttoned, bonnet wide as her disdain. She looked at the bride-turned boarder and sneered. "You're still here. No question. Just judgment." "He always did have a thing for broken things," the woman added, voice sweet as poison. The bride didn't flinch. "And you," the woman turned to the widower, "you should be ashamed. Taking in someone like her. It's unseemly." He stared at the woman. Not cruel. Just done. If you're here to buy eggs, he said, we don't have any. If you're here to sell gossip, we've no use for that either. The woman turned on her heel and rode off. That night, she didn't cry. She swept the porch twice. Then once more for good measure. He came out, sat beside her, and passed her a mug. Hot tea. No words. She sipped, then smiled into the steam. I used to think love meant flowers and music and promises. He sipped. And now? She looked up at the stars. Now I think maybe it's just being seen. And still being let in. He didn't answer. But he touched her wrist, briefly. A touch lighter than breath. Inside, the house didn't creak. It sighed. As if, for the first time in a long while, it wasn't lonely. The next morning, she found a book on her windowsill. The kind she used to read before life taught her other lessons. The corner was marked. A note tucked inside. Thought you might like this one. The woman in it is quiet, but she saves a whole town just by staying. She held the book against her chest. And just before stepping out into the morning chill, she whispered toward the back room, knowing he wouldn't hear, but saying it anyway. Thank you for not asking me to leave. From the kitchen window, he watched her walk into the dawn light. And in the slow lifting of her chin, in the calm way she fed the chickens, he saw something begin to grow. Not love. Not yet. But the soil was warm, and the roots had started to stretch. The frost didn't come loud. It slipped in quietly one morning, silvering the edges of the porch railing and leaving lacework across the windows. The world had gone quiet, as if holding its breath for something sacred. She stood at the threshold in bare feet, arms wrapped around herself, watching the way the light turned the pasture pale gold. He joined her wordlessly, coffee steaming between his hands. They stood like that for minutes, or maybe lifetimes. The silence between them no longer awkward, just full. They didn't speak much that week. Not about feelings, not about futures. But in small gestures, they began to rewrite the language of love. She stitched a button onto his flannel shirt and left it on the hook by the stove. He sharpened her kitchen knife and placed it neatly beside a new cutting board he'd carved from pine. One evening, she found a jar of blackberry jam on her nightstand with a folded scrap of paper beneath it. His handwriting, blunt, careful, read simply, I remembered you said your mother used to make this. She sat on the edge of the bed a long while, the jar in her lap, her fingers trembling from something deeper than cold. The next morning, she left a note of her own, tucked into his toolbox. She used to hum too, when she stirred it. You've got her steadiness, I think. He didn't reply aloud, but the next day he came in from a field with a sprig of wild mint in his hand, laid it gently beside her tea mug, then went back outside without a word. And so it went. Like two rivers running near each other, not yet joined, but knowing the way. He taught her how to split wood, not by force, but rhythm. She listened close, her fingers raw, her cheeks red from the cold. He didn't hover, didn't correct, just stood close enough that she knew she could fall and not hit ground. She baked a pie the next day, crust flaking, filling dark and warm. She placed it on the windowsill, then left for the root cellar. When she returned, there was only a single clean fork resting on the plate. No crumbs. No thanks. Just silence and warmth and the tiniest hint of a smile in his eyes when she passed him by. There were no stolen kisses, no longing glances, just the slow-building gravity of two lives pulling quietly toward center. But something else stirred too. One afternoon, a man rode up the trail. Not a neighbor, not a friend. His hat was too new, his smile too sharp, his boots too clean for this kind of mud. She answered the knock. He tipped his hat, and her breath caught. He looked familiar, too familiar. You've gotten thinner, he said, voice all syrup and arrogance. Thought I might find you out here. Word travels, you know. Her hand trembled against the doorframe. You left me, she said. Without a word. He smiled like a fox. Well, you weren't exactly honest, were you? Ought to have told me the truth before the wedding. I did, she whispered. You just didn't like it. He leaned in. I came to take you home. Let's not pretend you've got any better prospects out here, dressed in rags, baking pies for charity. She didn't flinch. But she didn't answer either. Behind her, the floor creaked. The widower stood in the hallway, one hand resting on the rifle above the door. Not threatening, just present. The other man turned slowly. Their eyes locked. Silence swelled. "She's not leaving," the widower said simply. The visitor chuckled. "That so? You two married?" "No," the widower replied. "But she stays here by choice." "That's more than I can say for anyone tied to you." The man's smile cracked. He glanced once more at her, shook his head, and stepped back off the porch. "You always did find broken things," he muttered. "I'll let the others know you're still as foolish as ever." She closed the door after him, bolted it. Her hands were shaking. The widower stepped forward, stopped when he was near enough for her to feel the heat off his coat. "He hurt you," he said. Not a question. She nodded. Then, softer, not with hands. With silence. With shame. He looked at her a long moment. Then said, "You don't ever have to explain yourself here." And she broke. Not loudly. Not with sobs. But with a quiet collapse into the nearest chair. Her fingers curled into her lap, like she was holding back the tide. He crouched in front of her, one hand resting lightly on her knee. Not to claim. Just to steady. "I told him," she murmured, "about the baby. The one I lost. I thought if I spoke it out loud, it might stop haunting me. But he—" She couldn't finish. "He made it a reason to leave," she said finally. The widower didn't move. He just said, "Ben, he never saw you." She looked at him then, eyes wide and brimming. "And you do?" His voice was barely a whisper. "I see everything that matters." She didn't kiss him, but she leaned forward, resting her forehead against his. And in that quiet, they found something more intimate than touch. That night, she pulled out the quilt from the cedar chest, the one with the baby shoes hidden underneath. She placed it at the foot of his bed, not to claim it, but to say, "I see your grief too, and I will not run." He found her in the kitchen later, hands dusted with flour, humming again. This time he joined her, a low, almost tuneless hum, but it made her smile. She turned and passed him a warm biscuit. He passed her a slice of salted butter, already softening at the edges. And they ate in silence, watching snow start to fall again. He asked her, once, what she would do if spring came. She answered, maybe plant something. "Flowers?" he asked. "No," she said. "Hope." A few days later, he brought home seeds, wrapped in brown paper. No label. "What are they?" she asked. "We'll find out," he replied. She tucked them into a drawer beside her brush. The days grew longer. She sewed curtains from a bolt of blue fabric he'd brought home from town. They didn't match anything. That's why she loved them. He built a bench beneath the kitchen window. Said, "Thought maybe you'd like to sit and watch the world wake up." She sat there the next morning, feet tucked beneath her, sipping tea, while he brought in wood and didn't look at her, but knew she was there. Their love didn't bloom like a firework. It was a hearth, steady, slow, lit by tiny embers of care. And still, she waited. Waited for the fear to come back, for the door to slam, for the silence to turn cold. But it didn't. And one day, while she was folding laundry, he placed a wrapped bundle beside her. She opened it slowly. Inside was her old wedding dress. Cleaned, pressed, restitched. He said, "Found it in the attic." Figured it deserved a second chance, too. She touched the fabric with shaking hands. "I don't need it," she whispered. "Maybe not," he replied. "But you deserve to keep it for yourself this time. Not for someone who ran." Her tears came then, soft and slow, sliding down her cheeks like spring thaw. "You're not waiting for me to leave?" she asked. He stepped closer. "No," he said. "I'm waiting for you to feel at home." And she did. Finally, she stood up barefoot and walked to him, laid a hand against his chest. "Then maybe it's time to start building one." Outside, the wind quieted. Inside, the house breathed easier. And the quilt, once folded like a memory, was laid across both their beds. The wind changed before the clouds did. It came curling down from the mountains, low and sharp, bending the prairie grass and rattling the porch rail. The sky followed slow, dragging thick slate clouds that darkened the light and made even the birds go quiet. Inside the house, she felt it. Not with her skin, but with something older, deeper. A knowing that storm was coming, not just of weather, but of reckonings long avoided. She had been in the cellar, arms buried in flour, kneading bread with the steadiness of someone who had learned to survive by routine. But when the first clatter of wind snapped against the barn, she paused. Upstairs, he was oiling the hinges on the back door. He felt it too. Their eyes met across the hallway, and for once they didn't need words. He moved toward the windows. She stoked the fire. By dusk, the snow had arrived, not soft like before, but in great horizontal sheets, slicing through the air like a warning. It hissed against the glass, pushed through cracks, tried to get in. She checked the pantry, made soup, lit extra candles. He bolted the doors, shuttered the barn, and checked the chimney draw. They moved together like they'd always lived this way, two halves of a machine designed for survival. But that night, the past didn't stay outside. It came back, carried in, not on the wind, but in the shape of a knock. A second one, harder. A voice on the other side, shouting her name. She dropped the ladle. He moved first. Rifle in hand, slow and careful, he approached the door. A third knock. No longer asking, demanding. She was at his side now, pale, still. "It's him," she said. He nodded once. "I figured." "Don't," she whispered. "Please don't answer. He's not here for peace." The widower didn't move. "He doesn't get to call you by name anymore," he said, voice low and quiet, like thunder far off. But the knock came again. "Open up," the man outside yelled. "You're hiding what's mine." "I'm not yours," she breathed. "I never was." The door didn't open. But the past, it didn't need doors. It seeped through the walls. The widower stepped back, set the rifle down, and looked at her. "You want me to send him away?" "No," she said, fist tight. "I want him to see that I'm not the girl he left." She walked to the door and opened it. Snow howled in, wild and blinding. And behind it, the man, hatless, angry, drunk on some mix of pride and liquor. "Well, look at you," he sneered. "Living like a squatter in a widow's shack. I ought to drag you back to town just to show them how low you've sunk." She didn't tremble. "You left me," she said. "I had my reasons." "So did I," she answered. He stepped forward. But before his boot touched the threshold, the widower was there. Not holding the rifle now, just standing, shoulders squared, calm. "Step back," he said. "You're not welcome here." "This don't concern you," the man growled. "Everything in this house concerns me," he replied. Snow swirled between them like breath from an angry god. The man's hand twitched toward his coat, but the widower didn't flinch. "You so much as touch a weapon," he said, "and you'll lose more than pride tonight." Something in the wind paused. The other man hesitated, saw something in those eyes, something quiet and dangerous. Not rage, not fear, just conviction. He laughed, but it was hollow. "You can keep her," he spat. "She's already broken." She stepped forward then, past both of them. "No," she said. "I was broken when I thought your love would fix me. I'm whole now, because I stopped waiting for men like you to see my worth." He stared at her, didn't speak, didn't have the words. She shut the door in his face, and for a moment there was only the sound of the storm and the pounding of her heart. He didn't knock again. When they looked out the window an hour later, his tracks were already being buried in snow. They didn't speak of it that night. Instead, he made tea. She added more logs to the fire. They sat on the floor, backs against the wall, shoulder to shoulder. And slowly, the silence softened again. "I thought you'd want to send me away," she whispered. "Never once crossed my mind," he said. "Even after what he said?" He turned to her. "You think I haven't seen what pain does to people? You think I don't know what it looks like when someone survives by folding themselves into shapes they were never meant to be?" She blinked. "I see you," he said. "Not your past. Not what others couldn't carry. You." The tears came quiet. She didn't wipe them. He didn't reach to stop them. But he leaned his head against hers. Let the weight of shared pain rest in that soft place between them. The fire crackled. And outside, the storm began to lose its fury. The next morning, she woke to light. Warm, golden light. the kind that only comes after snow. She stepped out onto the porch in her shawl, boots unlaced, hair unbraided. The world was white and clean and hushed. He came out after her, held 2 mugs in his hands. "You didn't sleep much," he said. "Neither did you." Storms passed. "Not all of them," she said. "Then, but maybe enough." They sat on the bench beneath the window, the one he'd built for her. She reached into her pocket, pulled out a folded scrap of linen. "I've been carrying this since the chapel," she said. "A name, a memory, a weight." She opened the cloth. Inside was a small silver charm, worn, dented. "It was meant to go on the cradle," she said. "I didn't know where else to put it." He looked at her, then at the charm, then took her hand. "Maybe it's time to build a new one." She blinked. "A cradle?" "No," he said. "A life." And she broke again, not from sorrow, but from the overwhelming relief of finally being seen, carried, chosen. Later that week, they buried the charm beneath the roots of a new tree they planted near the barn. A peach tree, fragile but stubborn, like hope. He dug the hole. She placed the charm. They didn't speak, but when the earth covered it, she felt something in her chest loosen. Spring would come, slowly, but surely. That night, she hung her wedding dress beside the fire, not to wear, not yet, but to mend it fully, for herself. In the quiet, he joined her, held out a second mug of tea, and said, "You turned this house into a home." "No," she replied. "You just let it happen." They sat near the hearth, the shadows dancing, the wind calm, and from the other room, the smallest sound. A knock. Not at the door, at the back window. She froze. He rose, cautious. But when he opened it, there was no threat, just a bundle, a basket, wrapped in a quilt she didn't recognize. And inside a baby, wide-eyed, silent, left at their door like a question. She stepped forward, hands trembling. She knew that look, that silence, that same weight she once carried. There was no note, just a ribbon tied to the handle. She looked at him. He looked at her, and without a word, she reached down, lifted the child into her arms. The baby didn't cry, just nestled against her like it had always belonged. He stepped behind her, hand on her shoulder. "Well," he whispered, "looks like heaven came early." She smiled through tears. "Looks like it never left." And in that warm room, in that house without a past, now full of future, the 3 of them stood beneath the dancing firelight. Not broken, not alone, but whole. Which city are you watching our video from? Please leave a comment. Please subscribe to the channel as well. Thank you.